It's not just technique or how fast or how high or how loud. It's all about, it's the art form. We're part of a centuries-old tradition. It's such a blessing to be a musician. And all of our practicing, it's not about logging practice hours. It's a craft.
Talk about a crazy amount of shared experiences and interests. I'm so excited to bring you today's episode. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and we are chatting with Eric Hansen today. Eric is the bass professor at Bringham Young University in Utah. He's the former principal bassist of the Winnipeg Symphony, and he has just such a cool path through the music world as not only a bassist, but a conductor, a composer, and he's an advocate for the bass. You're really going to love this conversation. I just had such a great time. This will be the first of many appearances from Eric, I assure you. I'd like to thank our sponsors today, D'Addario Strings, A440, and Upton Bass. More on them later, but let's dig into today's conversation with Eric Hansen.
Hey, Jason. How's it going?
I'm good. I was just talking to Barry Green yesterday. He was the person who suggested that we chat, which you've been on my list of people to talk to anyway. But it's just like a funny convergence of events. We met at Midwest in person in December, came over to the Eastman booth, and we're trying. Yeah.
That was so bizarre. That was just. I apologize for not knowing your face. I've just known your name forever. And here I am talking to this woman about, can I borrow this bass? And I looked to the side, like your tag, and went, wait a minute, Jason? You're Jason? There you are right there.
Yeah. Small world for, well, and then it's funny, so Barry and I were co-teaching for a day at UC Santa Cruz. This is about 2 months ago. And we were riding back from Santa Cruz to San Jose over the hill. I was dropping off at the airport, and he started talking about all these wonderful arrangements that Eric Hansen has done. Oh. And then he's like, have you interviewed Eric for the podcast? And I'm like, no, I haven't, but I absolutely should. So that was Barry was, he was strongly recommending that we chat.
Oh, that's so nice. Barry's just a force. I mean, you get with Barry, and it's just any conversation starts to kind of, at least it always feels like you start talking to Barry about stuff and what he's doing, and then he comes back at you and has comments and questions like that. And it's like your little creative juices just start flowing when you're around Barry. And so I'm with my wife's family. We had gone up. She's from Seattle. We're up there vacationing near the end of the summer before the start of a school year. This is a long time ago, like 12, 13 years. And I get up in the morning, I'm just doing stuff, and I get an email from Barry, and it says, how's it going? Would you consider writing a piece? And it was the beginning, right before school beginning, and I was trying to relax. I was trying not to think about too much work, and I was about ready to write back and just say, hey, maybe in a few months, or let's go or another year or something. I was feeling the pressure of school and new class and all that stuff. And no lie, at that very second, this little tune just popped in my head. And I sat there and thought about it. And I went over and got a piece of staff paper, and wrote it down. It was a little 4-bar phrase. And I wrote out the complementary other phrase and thought of B theme. So I went back and thought, well, here we go. Let's just see what happens. And then so I wrote back. He said, sure, let me see what I can crank out. Anyway, that idea turned into this piece that I wrote and submitted to David Hayes and the Recital Music. They used to have that competition every year. And it ended up winning second prize. And there's not too subtle reference to Barry. It's called the Greenberry Jig. So
I saw that on Recital Music. I saw that on the site.
Yeah, it turned out fun. It's a little piece. And then later on, he was part of a quintet that I wrote, and he participated in this festival in Poland, and I ended up unwittingly dragging some other victims into that performance. And anyway, Barry's been fun. He's a great friend, and like I said, you just every time I talk with him, it's like the little creative ideas kind of start flaring up, and you go, this could be it.
And not everybody is like that. And being around somebody with that kind of energy, and someone who is like that, excited about the next thing. That's so I find that very inspiring as well.
Yeah, it is. And then you find that there's I mean, we like to speak very favorably to the bass community, but you go around the world and you meet people, and it seems to be a common thread. A lot of great people out there. They love to collaborate, love to get together. I got to be a part of Artem Chirkov when he started the double bass world in Russia. The first 3 iterations, got to be a part of those festivals and just see that grow. And now I think they've had their 5th year or 4th or something like that this past year, and it's they've got young kids now, and there's people posting all stuff on Facebook and stuff like it's just fun to be a part of the bass world. Anywhere you go, everybody's anxious and wanting to get together and share and play and talk and discuss. It's great.
And this is something I think about a lot. And so my question is always like, why is the bass world that way? Is it the nature of, does the instrument, is it chicken or egg? Is the instrument does something to us, or is it the nature of the people that would play bass? You have any thoughts on that?
Oh man. You've gotten those comments from like other instruments, haven't you? Like people will say, every time I hang out on bass players, you guys are just so chill. You're just kind of fun. And, you get together in other countries, and either through translators or whatever, you get away from the instruments, you start talking about lives and careers, stuff like that. Inevitably, there are stories about, the smallest car you ever owned and how many, basses and significant others with their instruments you packed in there, or roommates. We all have the stories, and I don't know what it is. That's really, you kind of sometimes you sit back and reflect, because it is. I don't think it's solely the realm of the basses. I'm sure there's warm people across the instrumental spectrum, but it does seem to be a common characteristic for the bass players. Wherever you go, you find out your bass players, and it says, "Hey, let's go hang, let's go get a drink and talk." And oh yeah, check out this. Did you check out this fingering? Did you see this video? And everybody, we just start going. It's fun.
I think the low brass world might come close to, like, when I hang out with, a lot of my best friends are bass trombone players or trombone players or tuba players, and it's definitely there are some commonalities that my line. I think it's like some combination of someone who you don't typically pick up the bass to become a soloist. So there's that, like, just that supportive role. And then I think there is, not that our instrument's all about humor, but I think we are one step away from looking kind of ridiculous, whether it's like tripping over the bass, getting off out of our car, or like, right. So I think that there is, it's hard. I find it hard to take myself too seriously as a bass, like I take the bass seriously, but I think that I think we tend to have a pretty good sense of humor as bass players too.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, maybe we're just needy. Maybe we're lonely. We're at the bottom of the score, and our life is heavily peppered with whole notes and half notes and rests, and so we're like, we're needy. I'm teasing. I don't know. It's fun.
But there's something cool about being both at the bottom of the score and sitting at the back of the orchestra and observing it all. And I don't know whether it's I just spend so much time thinking about the bass world, but I see a high percentage of people either getting into composing or arranging or conducting. I know so many conductors that are bass players. I found that to be true in Chicago. That's true here in San Francisco. So I've noticed that, and that's another one of those things I've wondered why.
Yeah, well, hello, I'm Eric Hansen, and I'm a bass player who is also a conductor. So I got bit by that bug long time ago. In fact, as a junior in high school, I was in musical productions, and so I can't remember what happened, but anyway, I ended up in the pit with a baton in my hand to help. And then that's what started it all. And I've never recovered. I still, anyway, yeah, I have aspirations. I've had some wonderful opportunities. Got to go to Ecuador last September and conduct their symphony. Got to work with Kristen Chenoweth last year in another concert. And so that's an itch I like to scratch as often as I can.
So I find that totally fascinating. So we've got a lot, and besides Barry Green and the bass, we have a lot in common, because I've always been fascinated by conducting too. I stopped freelancing for about 7 years, got certified as a teacher, and I taught high school orchestra and was conducting youth orchestras. And actually in 2015, I conducted at the Midwest Clinic with my high school orchestra. So I have found it to be such a fascinating, it opened a whole new chapter on my musicianship. So, talk about huge topics okay, so you got interested in conducting in junior high, but you went to school as a bass major, correct? correct?
Yeah. Well, we moved in 1971, changed cities here in Utah, and we got into an area where there was a young new orchestra teacher. I think he was in his second or third year when we arrived. I have an older sister, and his program is where he would go around near the end of the school year to all the fourth grades with a group from the high school, but like a little quintet or sextet of strings, and just do recruiting, go play a little concert and try to foster, because he wanted kids to begin in fifth grade. And so my sister did it the year before I did. She went on violin, and then they came around in my fourth grade class, and right from the get-go, I'm not a convert from a viola or a cello or anything. I just, right from the get-go, there's that big thing in the back, and I went and told my parents, hey, I want to play the bass. And my mother's, of course, and understandably, probably the common experience of many parents of bass players, her first question was, don't you want to play something smaller? Because she could see her fate. The writing was on the wall. If he plays the bass, we're going to be buying station wagons, and I'm driving him everywhere until he's 16, which did end up being the case. I mean, hats off to my mom. She those are a whole bunch of other stories about driving to Salt Lake and lessons and early mornings. But yeah, so I started with that program in the fifth grade was when I started.
Wow. Okay. Fifth grade native bass player. Yeah, which is rare. I'd say probably like 10% of the people I talk to it come into the bass right away. A few, some do, but and so I know you studied forward a few years. Did you go to you did Peabody for bachelor's and master's?
Yeah, I did. Yeah,
with Hal Robinson, or
so I went to. So I was here. About a year after I started, actually very early, I was very fortunate to get in with Audrey Bush, who was the principal of the Utah Symphony for about 35 years. In fact, that's another, I to this day, I still feel a little bit of a tug as one of her students. Someone needs to do a biography of her, from 1945 to 1980 as a woman principal. Used to go for several summers in a row and spend the summer studying with Fortier at Juilliard to get better. Mauricio Bravanel brought her here, and a woman among men in those years as a principal bass. And I fortunately got in with her. And when I got back, I did the LDS mission thing. And when I got back, she had retired and moved away. And I was studying with this adjunct viola professor, and at his encouragement to really, I needed to find a real bass teacher. Auditioned for Aspen, got in the summer of '86. And got recruited, among others, by Levinson. And that was the summer he left Minnesota and went to New York. And he took the studio with him. And so I joined that move in the fall of '86. And, Andy Cohn, Paul Johnson, Rolf Erdahl, and others I'm forgetting, Kirby Nunez, who's in Hawaii, those guys. Those are some of my really good memories and friends that kind of joined me there with that move. And Levinson would come down every other week, do double long lessons because he was up in New York. And that lasted for about 2 years, and then he left. And then, some guy I'd never heard of, some guy from Texas that was the principal of the National Symphony comes to this first master class we're meeting him, some guy named Harold Robinson. I had no idea who this guy was. And he comes in, very cordial and nice, and meeting us all. And now I think I understand, knowing Hal and his humor, he was turning on the draw really thick. He was just really, how's going, everybody? Really got this really thick draw going on, just I think because of the perceptions, about Southerners, all that stuff. And I really thought, oh my dear, who I've gone from this Russian elite artist, trained musician to this country bumpkin from Texas, and it was so funny. And I'll never forget how it was his very first master class, and he meets us all, and again, knowing Hal and his wonderful sense of humor, just to push buttons, he literally says, this is a quote, he says, well, this is a master class. I guess it's time to get up on stage, drop your drawers, and show us what you got. I was just hysterical. And that sold it for me. I was just like, oh my gosh, I got to change schools. I have no idea who this guy is. And then we started lessons, and then he starts playing. And I thought, okay. And so, I feel very fortunate to have had 3 years with Hal, finished the master's with him at Peabody, and then did a year of doctoral work at the University of Maryland And then after a year of that, he went exclusively to Peabody and ended up finishing my last year with Curtis Burris. Took over for Hal there. Continued to have lessons with Hal whenever I could during that last year as well, because I just, Hal, everybody who's interacted or studied, especially with Hal, just know when you say, oh, it's Hal. He's such a unique artist and is, leaving his mark and indelible influence on the bass world for history. It's pretty incredible. So I feel very fortunate to study with him. The 2 years with Levinson was great. And so Audrey, Levinson, and Hal were kind of the people I look back and think of my main influences as teachers, and grateful to them. And there's been others that I've had little like one-offs or 3 or 4 lessons here, but those 3 are the primary ones.
This episode is brought to you by the A440 Violin Shop. It's located just down the street from Wrigley Field in beautiful Chicago on the north side, just off the Brown line. I have been going there my entire adult life, and they have been fantastic, both for repairs. I've had cracks repaired. I've had seams glued. I've had all sorts of students go to A440 to get instruments, to get bows. They're available with a smile, do wonderful work, and definitely check them out if you are in the Midwest. A440violinshop.com, and thanks for sponsoring the podcast. Now, why did you decide, if you can think back to then, why the doctorate? Why? Because a lot of people, and I know you ended up playing with Winnipeg, why did you decide to go that route? Were you thinking academic position at that point, or wanted more study?
No, it was partly that. It was partly, if you stay in school, the student loans don't kick in, kind of a thing. I was in the middle of, I'd been taking auditions as much as I could, as far away as I could afford, and as many as would, the schedule would allow, and was starting to make some progress getting into second rounds and things like that, but still had not secured a job. And we had 2 kids at the time, and I finished the master's and just thought, what am I going to do? Should I try to just focus on practicing or what? And so I talked to my parents, talked to Hal as well, got their input, and just asked, what are the things? And everybody seemed to agree that if I didn't have any immediate pressing needs to leave school, if I could find the muster. And, we all reached that point where we're kind of done with school. We want to just walk away, which is funny because now, after all these years, I'd love to go back to school. It'd be wonderful. But at their encouragement, it was and very helpful at the time just to say, just stick with it and get the terminal degree, finish it. It's a bit of it can feel like a bit of a long, death march at times, but I'm glad because it provided another year with Hal. I got to meet Curtis and study with him. And of course the resources at the University of Maryland, symphony, chamber music, and all the other things that the ancillary stuff that added in and influenced you, were helpful. So that was the main reason. It was mainly, I didn't have a job at the time, was still auditioning. I was doing a lot of part-time stuff. I was in the Richmond Symphony, was in the Baltimore Opera Orchestra, Baltimore Chamber Orchestra. Those are all part-time things, and teaching up in Pennsylvania at Dickinson College. And that's what you do to piece together kind of support your family and make ends meet, but you're looking for a little bit more stability. So there's a number of things, but I'm in the hindsight, I'm glad we did. Glad we stuck around.
Yeah. And then the stability, I imagine, came because you ended up getting the principal gig in Winnipeg.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. That was a great 10 years. That's just a great band. The most memorable thing was just the section. It was just a fun bunch of guys. We had a great relationship, and I love those years. My stand partner at the time, he's since retired, Stan Label. I was young getting in there when he got into that symphony. I was 6. That was our age difference. And so I'm principal, he's assistant, and I really made a conscious decision to not try to assume any sort of an authority over him or something like that. I thought, I'm going to learn from this guy. He's got a ton of experience, and I'm kind of new. Let's make this a good relationship. And it's nice to have a job that you enjoy, but it's also be surrounded by people that you like to be with, Mm-hmm. And that section was just my favorite thing about that job was just that they're very supportive. They were all older than I was, and they were patient, helping, and just kind of, gentle with helping me, become a better principal, better leader. And the orchestra was great. We had great variety. It was a good job, fun.
Well, so Were you conducting in Winnipeg, like outside of the when did you start when did the conducting come into the picture for you?
It's been primarily amateur for all these years. I got started teaching at the University of Winnipeg with the bass stuff, of course, and then really enjoyed teaching, got involved with teaching theory and ear training. And 1 year, the director, they had a changeover, and he said, do you have any experience conducting? And I had. Like I said, way back in high school it started, and I had just kind of kept it up. I really enjoy the podium time, and I said, yeah. So for about 6 years, those last 6 years in Winnipeg, I did the university orchestra there, which was fortunate because the position here at BYU, that's actually was a combination they were hoping to find with the bass position. They were hoping it would be someone that could teach the bass primarily, but also take over one of the orchestras here. And so it was fortuitous to have that combination already kind of there. Mm-hmm.
So for me, like it's really interesting how I definitely think about music and structures and pieces and learning a piece differently after spending all this time conducting that I've done. I mean, my batons are gathering dust in a drawer down there. I don't do it at all anymore, but I did. I mean, I had 5 hours a day for 7 years. I think I was up on that podium. Wow. And a super big question, I'm sure there's no clear answer, but like, I'll just throw it out there. Like, how do you think conducting has helped you as a bass player or vice versa?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that question. I have wanted, there's a project I've thought about for years, and if there's a way to verbalize it, because this idea was started with Levinson, and it was even Hal and I used to have these discussions, and he kind of really piqued my interest. And I got to sub with Hal a couple of times, and it was interesting to watch him do this. And as bass players, you understand the role of the bass in any ensemble, primarily in orchestras, but that one of the primary things is we're part of the rhythm section, and just the idea of where the beat is, and out there in the orchestra. And sometimes there's that discrepancy between what's happening in the orchestra and the podium.
Yes.
And I'm sure you've had the experience. You sit back there as a bass player watching this, and you're just thinking, oh, come on, just be with the orchestra. Don't always have to be in front, whatever. But I used to try to pick Hal's brain, and he had a lot of really cool, just kind of tune-up. And he used to talk about just the sixth sense, about sensing where, and he'd invite me to try to interpret each conductor and kind of discover like little basic things like when you watch a conductor conduct, where is their beat? Is it in the baton? Is it in their wrist? Sometimes it's in their chin, or they kind of bob up and down with their legs, and the beat's more centered in another part of their body than where their hands is. And his invitation was to the role of the section within the orchestra of how we can lead an orchestra in a way, in an aural kind of rhythmic way, where we place beats and how we articulate things. And then that's the project. I thought, wouldn't it be cool to somehow assemble the collective wisdom on that topic from all these great principles like Bertram and Hal and Barry, or, Frank, and, all these guys that have had years of experience, and have them come in and talk about how do you interpret the rhythm? How do you stay together as a section, and how does the section form this cohesive unit to be able to provide, sometimes in a rescuing way almost, when things kind of go awry from the podium and there's that little bit of a question mark hovering out there. And if there's a great bass section that knows exactly where things can be or ought to be, you just say, here it is, we'll give it to you, and it's, I can see you nod. We understand this. I just don't know how to verbalize it.
Yeah, it's a very difficult thing to verbalize. And there are so many different approaches, too. Like, I look at what Chris Hanulik does in the LA Philharmonic, and he leads in a different way than Scott Pingle here in San Francisco. And now we've got Colin Corner and Oregon Symphony. I was just playing in that orchestra, and he leads in yet a different way. And it's different with different conductors. And the whole, the where's the beat? How do you respond to the beat? Where's it located? What's your job as a principal bass? I mean, as both former principal bassist and conductor, you've probably thought a ton about this. Yeah, how to wrap your brain around that project. That's the challenge.
Yeah, that was kind of a long tangent, but to kind of more directly answer your question, I think the conducting interest I've had for a long, long time, and all the influences and training and teaching I've been fortunate to have from other people really go hand in hand, and both affect each one. I mean, the conducting I do, I definitely approach it from the standpoint of that accompanying sense of trying to facilitate as a bass player what's out there, not, and leading and following them when appropriate. And then vice versa, the way you play, either as a principal or as a member of a section, when you try to think about, that you can kind of quote conduct as a section or as a person, like if you're in a little chamber ensemble, or if you're in a jazz group, you and the drummer, it's a very similar role, and the role the bass player can have. It's a wonderful thing. Sometimes when we talk about it, it sounds a little bit egotistical or subversive. We're in control, and it's and I think it's important to remember it's not a subversive thing at all. It's just kind of if we really recognize and joyfully take on what can be a very crucial and positive role, everybody around us loves us for that. If we're really fulfilling what ideally the role should be of the bass player, both rhythmically, harmonically, and all that stuff, everybody around you just loves playing with you. You just make everything else, that foundation is there that everybody can just ride on, and it helps. And so, one of the challenges of verbalizing is just at the first glance, it kind of saying, boy, you bassists are really egotistical guys. You think you control everything. And we say, well, yeah, we do, but we're going to talk about it humbly. Yeah. I'm trying to be facetious, but don't you agree? I mean, you have times when you just, we may not be playing the most exciting notes rhythmically, but that's part of the joy of being a real bassist in a professional setting is and both Hal and Curtis, I remember specifically, and Levinson even would invite you to think about, you're playing downbeats, but it's how you play the downbeats. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Can you play that succession of 8 downbeats or whatever melodically? Can you, follow phrasing and stuff like, I'm sorry, I'm not meaning to get too.
I think this is fascinating. Yeah. And I think about that because I had that really interesting period when I was playing in this regional orchestra, the Elgin Symphony. And that's when I was doing that full-time job. And I had so many weeks where I would spend all those hours on the podium and then I'd go be in the bass section. And of course I was thinking about what's that conductor up there thinking? And then when I was conducting, I'd be thinking, what's that bass player? They weren't professionals, but still, yeah. I think it was real. I thought a lot about what you're describing, and boy, just getting that shift in perspective, especially, professional players, you're typically more often than not, you're not conducting. Your life is in that bass section. So it's just a really interesting perspective shift to get up there on that box and all those eyes are pointed your way. And that first ring of string players is up there. It's like a little private party up there with you and them. And the basses are way in the back. And how the sound travels to the podium and how different that experience is for me. I'm going on and on, sorry. But how that feels in the bass section and how that contrasts with how that feels on the podium. I mean, you learn a lot.
Yeah. Hal, he allowed me to sub when I was studying with him, sub with the National Symphony, and a couple of times in rehearsal, he'd have me come up and sit right next to him, and I mean, it was very infrequent, but there was a couple, and he would just little comments about, inspire what you see from the podium. Let's wait for that bassoon note, or. One summer we were at Wolf Trap. I was subbing. It was, everybody's taking summer weeks off, and so I got called to sub. It was a small little orchestra, and I think it was a Brandenburg they did or something like that. And so there was down to one bass, and we just were taking time. But I sat and I just watching him lead and listening to him. Those kinds of that kind of education is I just look back and it was so invaluable to just think about it, and that influences you on the podium as well. Yeah. And also, and again, we're going to sound egotistical, but I think being bass players, because we spend our lives listening and accompanying, maybe gives us it can, let me put it this way, rather than an exclusive thing, it can provide us with a perspective from, gesture-wise from the podium. What is going to be the most helpful to the orchestra? Mm-hmm. Often you hear kind of the maestro set, I'm not a human metronome, kind of, I'm just not going to stand. Well, sometimes we need that. Sometimes being a bass player, maybe sometimes we kind of very empathetic to what would be helpful at this moment for the ensemble to happen as it should, Anyway,
I totally see that. And I think there's something about being on the periphery of the ensemble too. Like you're also taking in the ensemble in a different way than the conductor is, but that outer ring, maybe the percussion or harpist has a similar experience, but like, right. Yeah, you're observing in a little bit more versus playing like a first violin part and you're in the thick of it and you got 20,000 notes flying by you. Your brain's occupied in a different way than,
yes, exactly. No, that's a very good point. Yeah.
Hi, this is David Moore. I'm a professor at the USC Thornton School of Music as well as a bassist in the LA Philharmonic. Gosh, I've been using Diodario Kaplans for the past several years, the heavies especially in the orchestra as well as on the bass that I have at USC. I just really like the versatility that they give, especially dynamically. They just respond well in soft dynamics and well in loud dynamics that can really take anything that I can dish out. And they're just a really well-balanced string across all of my instruments. I've also used the Zayek strings more kind of in an experimental way. I'm honestly looking for sort of the combination and the sweet spot between the two of those because I really like the ring and the response and the tension of the Zayeks with some of the more conventional characteristics of the Kaplans. I'm hoping that that's something that's in the works someday in the future. Hope that helps.
One thing that has impressed me about Upton Bass ever since I got to know them was how many artists there are out there that are so satisfied with the work that Upton has done for them. Here's Lucia Torino of The Devil Makes Three, outstanding band, on her experiences with Upton.
I have the Upton travel bass. A friend of mine who was in a band called Brown Bird, I think she'd had some work done on her bass, and she had a pickup that she got from Upton, and she knew one of the guys who worked down in the factory in Mystic. Also, calling it a factory is really charming because it's really just a barn that smells amazing with lots of cool basses and very sweet men. Chris Wood, I think he had 2 Chadwick basses with him, and so I got my courage up and sort of sidled over to him at one point and was like, I need a bass, what should I get? And I talked about Chadwick and about Upton, and he was like, honestly, I'd go with the Upton.
Learn more at uptonbass.com, and thanks for sponsoring the podcast, guys. I would love to know, and I think because like I don't get to talk about these topics a lot with people when I do chats for the podcast, but like score study, score preparation. You're getting ready to conduct a concert. How do you have anything you do to prepare, even whether it's an old work you've done or a new work? Do you have like a system, like listening, marking the part in a certain way, singing through things, playing on the piano? I'm just curious.
All of the above. I mean,
okay.
I think any way that it helps us just become more familiar with what's there. There's you could kind of divide it into like 2 levels. The initial level is just familiarity with the piece in terms of like crescendo this, sharp, flat this is the meter here, there's a change, tempo, all that stuff. And then above that is where you start really considering all the musical elements to it, phrasing. And I enjoy listening to different recordings, different interpretations, and finding what speaks to me, what maybe I would rather do differently. And then in that arena, always trying to plan ahead and figure out, again, this aspect of what can I demonstrate physically? What can I do in terms of gesture that will I'm a big advocate of the less verbiage and the more you see me conduct. I don't want to conduct with my words. Yeah. Those conductors, they have to stop every 2 measures and tell you what they're going to do because they're not showing it. So I try to I want to be, who knows, maybe people are going to go watch the videos now and say, boy, you're a hypocrite. You're talking. Ideally, in Eric's ideal world, I think it's, you want to give some thought about, how am I going to show this? How am I going to gesture this? Or even, how would I rehearse this? Something that's very difficult for whatever reasons, strategizing how you might address this, particularly if it's a piece that, maybe is a new commission and nobody has seen before. There's a whole flip side conversation that when you're, when I went to Quito, Ecuador last September, we did I programmed some of the Slavonic dances as kind of a little set to begin the concert. And you realize quickly that, here's people in the orchestra that have probably played them for about as many years as I am old, so I don't want to assume some that, we're going to do it my way now. You want to facilitate, draw out from the players their best artistry and invite collaboration.
Well, and to me, I think about leadership a lot, and it's just interesting. I understand why orchestras are brought in for conventions and that sort of thing to show people examples of leadership, because it really is interesting, like that role of the conductor and like being an effective leader. I think it's very similar, translated over into the business world. And I did an interesting experiment. Well, it wasn't so I had a very long commute when I was teaching high school. It was between 1 and 2.5 hours each way, depending on traffic. And wow. I started recording all of my rehearsals, audio recording, just on my iPhone. And on the way home, I would listen to my rehearsals, which at first was torture, because I'm like, but it really started to help, because and something about just hearing the audio and not seeing the visual element, but it was really interesting to me. I started really paying attention to like when I would stop, if I caught what I really heard, because I would, when I listened back, I would catch things that in the moment I wasn't. And then if I said anything, was it helpful? And did it sound better? And, it was really fascinating. And I actually got into it enough that I started sharing some of those recordings with the kids. I would put them on Google Drive or whatever, and I would just email that orchestra a link, and I'd say 31 minutes, listen to this. And then I wouldn't do it every day, but I found that to be so, and I know people do that with their practicing. It's like one of the things bass players talk about, like record yourself. And it didn't occur to me until that last year, I should record myself and I'll get better. So
that's impressive. I mean, as we all know, when we record ourselves and we listen, how humbling that is.
Yes.
So I'm impressed with how openly submissive you are, just to take in exactly what you're listening to and to learn from it. That's really impressive.
It was really interesting doing that just as an experiment, and especially am I really aware of what's actually going on? And am I addressing what can help in that moment? Because, it's just and I think that circling back to bass, I think that's helped me to be a better bass teacher. Because with orchestra, I realized sometimes I could say something that is just not going to help at that moment, because they have to sit with the piece. They have to live with it a little bit more. I'll get a student that says, we're just not ready to talk about vibrato in thumb position right now. It's not even a thing. In 2 months, we will be. But I think I got a lot better with pacing and just overall progress. And I don't know, that's sort of one of my takeaways from the conducting bass continuum.
Wow. And then you just made the crossover into teaching, because you're hitting on some really very high idealistic teaching principles, which, oh man, I've had a couple of really difficult conversations with some of the students in my own studio this past year. Mm-hmm. Part of the introspection, looking backwards, is kind of precisely what you say, as I, to go back and realize, am I really hearing what I'm supposed to be hearing as a teacher? And am I really verbalizing not only what I really need to say, or is this really what the student needs to hear? I mean, wow, this is stuff that makes you change careers.
Now I got to circle back to Barry Green, because I've got exactly what we're talking about right now. Barry made a really interesting comment to me. He said, you don't really teach anybody anything. All you do is point things out. And I thought that was a really, and that is so true in a way, because the learning happens within, right? That really is what you do. You can point in as a conductor too. It's like, look at that, so that, to me, I've been thinking a lot about that comment.
That's profound stuff. I mean, that really is. And I mean, we can talk for hours about this, but you raised some just really fascinating points about, I'm in a reflective mood, because you've been asking some really fun questions for me to think back about, Audrey and Hal and Eugene and Curtis and other teachers. And yet here I am so many years later in that role, trying to pass on, and your Barry's comment about you're just pointing things out. Yes, it's very true. And it's to learn how to be an effective teacher.
Yeah.
And every student's, there's so many factors in the equation. How do the students learn? Are they oral learners? Are they visual learners? Do they learn better with a bass in my hands by demonstrating the fingering? Mm-hmm. Or do I write it in a book and all those things? And then just 2 weeks ago in one of the lessons, we just had an end of our semester, so there's been a real flurry of, panic to get ready for juries. In one of the lessons, I'm changing a bowing of a photocopy of my own music that I had given the student to give them bowings and fingerings. I'm changing the bowing, and the student says, "But that's your bowing." And I said, "Well, yeah, but that was back, And you use the word journey, and that's so true. It's just, you grow and change and you learn. And we were fortunate to have Edgar come. He came through the state doing some stuff, and we arranged to get him to come, and he did a little master class. And someone asked him this about, what method books should I use and stuff like that. And he wisely said, everything's kind of a means to an end. Go, he put it back on them and says, do your own exploring. In the end, you got to find out what works for you and make it work. You be open-minded. That's cool. We don't really teach anything. We just kind of point things out.
Yeah.
My stand partner in Winnipeg used to say, when you're ready to learn, a teacher will magically appear.
I like that.
Which was humorous at first glance, but you think about that and the more metaphorical meanings of that, and that's true. When when we really want to learn something, when we're ready and we want to absorb and find out about it, teachers of various sorts, either by our own looking on the internet or in books or practicing in woodshedding or talking to people, a teacher will appear, and it's really true. And trying to instill that journey in students is, I guess, one of the prime things we can do as teachers is, what do you think? What have you tried? What have you discovered? Where have you dug? What have you, Sorry, go ahead.
No, I 100%, so we definitely have to do a round 2 and a round 3, because there's no way we've scratched like 0.1% of like 9 topics that I really want to dig into. But like I have that it's funny because like open-mindedness is really like what Edgar said, what it's all about. But a lot of the times I think when we think we're being open-minded, we're really not. And so like just how to get yourself or a student or whoever you're working with into a state where they're open-minded and receptive. And I think one of the things I've gotten better at in the last few years is really like asking a lot of questions of the student. And even though I may know it's down bow, I almost never tell them to do down bow anymore. And I think sometimes I do, but just trying to like light that fire. I've thought a lot about that. Like, how do you light a fire or how can you encourage a student to light their own fire, I guess would be a better way to put it.
Yeah. If somehow as teachers we could foresee what can you provide for the student that will ignite that little flame, because it's fun to observe that come on, and then to see their passion for what they do, especially in the practice. We had this discussion a lot in our own master class about constantly trying to find ways to improve our practice. What do you do in the practice room? Are you just passing time or goal oriented? All those the techniques and ideas that people have and share. I guess for me it was, I remember when you start sense that you're getting better and you can see yourself getting better. Mm-hmm. It's those little incremental step-by-step parts of mastery, and you're trying to get this and then you get it. And that makes you hungry for the next one. And then practicing really becomes fun. It's this time in the laboratory where progress is being made. And I've always loved that feeling, and to try to engender that in students where, last week we talked about this, and isn't that a little bit better this week?
One of my students, we're working through the George Vance books. And one day I just decided, let's go to the first tune in the book and start playing through it. And that was the best decision I could have made, because we were just like pushing in lessons. And I know people go back and review. That's one of the things you should do. But boy, he was just so thrilled to like go through, and the lesson got done. And he's like, I've gotten so much better. This is so much easier. I'm noticing all these things. And I was like, yeah. And so that like, I've been doing that much more frequently since then.
Oh yeah. I remember, when I first started with Hal, I think it was the first year of my doctorate degree, he gave a recital at the University of Maryland, and on the program, he programmed the Dragon Eddy. Mm-hmm. And, the attitudes that are out there, some people really kind of poo-poo it and consider it more of a student concerto, and I had started to brush up against kind of those attitudes. I'd learned it and played it, but I remember thinking it was a little bit of a, oh, wow, Hal, you're doing the Dragon Eddy. Okay. And I love to share this story with students here, because it's all about this issue of, it's not just technique or how fast or how high or how loud. It's all about, it's the art form. We're we're part of a centuries-old tradition. It's such a blessing to be a musician, and all of our practicing, it's not about logging practice hours. We're part of this. It's a craft, It's hard to put into words. I subbed with Utah Symphony a little while ago, and we played with Hilary Hahn. And you watch that kind of artistry, and then that makes me want to go to the practice room because I want to play like Hilary when I grow up.
Yeah.
And so anyway, Hal's version of the Dragonetti was transformative because you most often hear students do it. Right. And when he played it, it was a completely different piece. I really, to this day, I still remember the feeling. I was just slack-jawed watching him play, thinking, that's how the Dragonetti, it sounded like Haydn. It was so beautiful and so engaging that from then on I thought, okay, I'm never approaching that piece the same way. But that idea that everything that we're trying to do is that almost unspeakable, unverbalizable. There's a good word for you. It's hard to put into words the joy and the satisfaction we feel participating in this art form on that highest level. Either personally for us as professionals or when we get to take kids through something, and have them have that experience where the hair stands up on the back of the neck and they say, this is cool. You play a great Richard Meyer piece with the middle school orchestra, and they go, this is so awesome. And you go, yeah, it is. This is live music. This is cool.
Mm-hmm. I love that. That feel, Richard Meyer, you bring up one of our middle school orchestras here in San Francisco, probably several of them are doing Dragon Hunter, Richard Meyer, like a great grade 2 piece. And it's just fun to work through it. I love seeing that. And I'm getting all excited about Dragon Hunter too. We're telling stories and so it's a beautiful process. Well, listen, I have to have you back. This has to be the first of many. I love having people back.
I'm really honored that you'd want to reach out, and I hope I've given something that can be shared and what might be inspiring and helpful.
Eric, thank you so much. So great to have you on the show. Folks, check out the show notes for a link to Eric's page on the BYU site. And if you want to get in touch with Eric, great guy. Shout out to Barry Green and all the other people we talked about on today's show. And I just love doing these conversations. Like Eric and I were talking about, for me, this is a nice framework to have a conversation that I'd want to be having anyway. And to be able to put it out into the world is just like this extra bonus for me. And I just love hearing from people who are enjoying the show. I get these messages each and every day from people all across the world, all continents, maybe not Antarctica. I don't think I've gotten one yet from there, but all the other continents I've heard from, and I just love hearing from people. Feedback at contrabassconversations.com will put you in touch with me. I respond to each and every message, and let me know what you thought about today's episode, what you might like to hear in the future, this conducting project that Eric and I were talking about. Wow, that would be cool to find a way to do a podcast on that somehow. I have so many great suggestions from listeners, and I am working hard in terms of guests and topics and new projects. I just love experimenting on the podcast. Contrabass Conversations is produced by Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Trevor Jones, and Mitch Mooring. If you're looking for a double bass, Mitch is making beautiful instruments in the Dallas area. Learn more at mitchmooring.com. I'm your host, Jason Heath, coming to you each and every week from San Francisco, California, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.